If you look at almost any classic hero's journey in modern storytelling, there's always this fundamental expectation of, well, a defining moment of choice.
Right, the turning point.
Exactly. It's
Wow.
usually very clean, very binary. I mean, you look at a cultural touchstone like the 1999 film The Matrix, and the entire architecture of that story pivots on one very quiet, intensely focused scene.
The pill scene?
Yeah, two hands extended, two pills. And the rules are laid out perfectly clearly. You voluntarily take the blue pill, the story ends, you wake up in your bed, and you go right on believing whatever comforting fabrication you want to believe.
Before you take the red pill.
Right, you take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland,
Yeah.
and you make this conscious, calculated choice to see the cold, painful truth of the machinery that's actually running the world.
And that choice is the absolute linchpin of the entire narrative philosophy.
Totally.
Without that moment of agency, the hero isn't really a hero. They're just a victim of circumstance. The protagonist has to voluntarily accept the painful truth over the comfortable illusion.
Because otherwise it changes everything.
Exactly. If you remove the consent from that scene, you completely change the genre of the story. It goes from a hero's awakening to, frankly, a psychological horror.
And that genre shift is exactly where we're stepping today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
Today we are looking at a stack of intensely provocative essays, systemic reviews, and structural reports. And they take the architecture of the Matrix and use it as a conceptual forensic map to completely deconstruct the global adoption system.
It is a staggering framework.
It really is. And when you read the embodied first-person perspective in these sources, like really channeling the visceral lived reality of the adoptee, that whole framework of choice is violently shattered.
Because the choice wasn't there.
Right. Because for the adoptee, the supposed hero of their own life story, that red pill was never offered. It was administered at birth. It was dissolved into the paperwork completely without their consent, administered by total strangers, long before they had the cognitive ability to speak, let alone comprehend the gravity of what they were, quote-unquote, choosing.
And while the adoptee is forced to swallow that reality, society, meanwhile, lines up to voluntarily swallow the blue pill.
Which we see all the time.
We see it constantly in our cultural discourse. Society happily, almost aggressively, accepts this comforting, benevolent narrative of rescue. They heavily embrace the myth of the ironically termed forever family.
Oh, man, yeah, the forever family narrative.
Right, and they deliberately choose not to look at the structural machinery operating behind the curtain. But I think it's really important, just as we get into the weeds here, to clearly frame what we are actually doing for anyone listening.
Yes, please. Set the stage.
The source material we're unpacking today provides a highly confrontational, deeply structural critique of a system that most people consider just unconditionally good.
Unimpeachable, almost.
Exactly. So our role today isn't to take a political stance on this author's work or to endorse a specific side of the adoption debate, left or right. We are essentially acting as your guides.
Right.
We're mapping out exactly how this author uses a famous sci-fi architecture to dismantle a system we rarely scrutinize. We want to understand the mechanics of their argument impartially, not tell you what to believe about it.
I'm really glad we put that on the table, because the framework is intense, and we really are just looking at the code the author has presented.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. So let's start with that foundational code, this concept of the forced pill. The sources are incredibly specific about how this erasure happens legally.
Right, the actual paperwork.
Yeah. The decree of adoption is signed, the original identity is completely sealed, and all of this occurs while an infant is literally just learning the rhythm of their natural mother's heartbeat.
Which is a profound disconnect.
I mean, I am trying to wrap my head around this legally.
Yeah.
In any other area of life, buying a house, taking a job, taking out a loan, a contract requires mutual consent.
Basic contract law.
Right. If I don't sign my name, the contract is void. So how on earth does the state legally justify binding a human being to a lifetime agreement, an agreement that alters their entire identity, when the primary subject completely lacks the ability to consent?
It's a fundamental question. And the legal texts in our stack answer it by pointing to a specific mechanism known as a status transaction.
Status transaction.
Okay. You're entirely right about standard contract law. A normal contract requires an offer, an acceptance, and consideration, all negotiated between consenting parties. But a status transaction doesn't play by those rules at all.
So what does it do?
It is a legal proceeding that fundamentally transforms a person's legal identity and their entire relationship to the state and to society.
Wow.
In the architecture of adoption, you have the natural mother who signs a relinquishment. And the sources are quick to point out that this is often done under immense systemic duress, poverty, or sheer institutional coercion.
Right, it's rarely a neutral environment.
Exactly. Then you have the adoptive parents, who sign a petition and pay the requisite fees. Finally, you have the state, which issues the decree and stamps the seal.
But wait, where is the child in this?
That's the kicker. The primary subject, the infant, whose entire biological lineage, legal name, and reality is being completely overwritten, is the only party in the room who signs nothing.
They just wake up inside a simulation they never agreed to enter.
Yeah.
The parameters of their reality have just been coded by a committee of adults, none of whom share their DNA.
That is the exact structural reality. The state essentially creates a legal fiction.
A legal fiction, I've heard that term.
In jurisprudence, a legal fiction is a construct that the law completely accepts and enforces as strictly true, even if it is demonstrably biologically false.
That is wild.
It is. The primary subject is completely bound by a contractual reality crafted by a network of total strangers.
But logically, I mean, if the subject never consented to taking that pill, if they were forced into this fabricated legal fiction, how does this system ensure they remain compliant?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Right, because history tells us that any system which forces compliance without securing consent eventually faces a massive rebellion. I mean, the human spirit naturally bucks against a cage it didn't choose.
It always does.
And the author points directly to how the architect in the Matrix handles this exact problem. They don't use physical chains. They feed the anomaly a prophecy.
This is one of the most fascinating psychological components of the text. It refers to this as the prophecy trap.
The prophecy trap. I love that term.
Think back to the film. Neo is told from the very beginning that he is the one. He is given this grand prophecy that feels incredibly empowering.
It feels like destiny.
Right. It feels like the ultimate liberation. But as he moves deeper into the system, the architect eventually reveals that this prophecy is not about freedom at all.
It's just more math.
Exactly. It's a highly sophisticated mathematical control mechanism. The prophecy was designed by the machines as a systematic way to manage the inevitable anomalies that arise in the code.
So they're just funneling rebellion into a predictable path.
Exactly, so they can eventually reset the simulation entirely. The prophecy isn't a weapon against the Matrix. It is a feature of it.
And when you map that onto the embodied reality, the adoptee, the parallel is genuinely chilling. The sources argue that for the adoptee, the prophecy trap manifests as the leash of exceptionalism.
Not a leash of exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From the moment they can understand language, they are told they are chosen. They're told they are special. They are a gift.
Which sounds so positive.
Right. Now put yourself in the shoes of someone observing this from the outside. If you've taken the blue pill, if you're just looking at this through the lens of societal norms, those labels sound beautiful.
They sound like the ultimate validation a parent could give a child.
Exactly. But the author's forensic breakdown argues that these terms are actually the most refined, insidious control mechanisms available to the system.
Because they preemptively silence any internal dissent.
Right.
Control systems, to be truly efficient, cannot rely on external force forever. You can't just keep guards everywhere. They require self-policing mechanisms. The text brings in the work of psychologist David Brzezinski here.
Okay, what does he say?
Specifically, it highlights his concept of the social contract of gratitude.
Ah, yes. The unspoken, invisible compact that basically governs the adoptee's entire existence.
Precisely. The adoptee is socially conditioned from infancy to believe that in exchange for basic care, shelter, and belonging...
Which, by the way, are things that non-adopted children just receive as a baseline human right.
Exactly. But for the adoptee, they feel they must assimilate completely into this prefabricated narrative in exchange for those things. They have to constantly perform the role of the chosen child.
That is so heavy.
The sheer psychological genius of this leash is that it weaponizes the child's own exceptionalism against their internal reality. If the system tells you that you are chosen, how dare you complain?
Right. If you're so special, why would you ever feel the need to search for your family of origin?
It frames any natural curiosity, any grief, as an act of profound ingratitude.
It essentially functions as a psychological quarantine. I want to try and channel the visceral, lived reality described in these essays here, because the cognitive dissonance must be profound.
It's staggering.
The adoptee sits there thinking, okay, if I am such a precious gift, why do I have this underlying sensation of being stolen property?
Wow.
The internal weight of carrying that contradiction alone is massive.
The sources argue that the adoptee is essentially tasked with performing the emotional healing of the adoptive family.
Which is a huge burden for a child.
Right. Maybe the adopter struggled with infertility, or maybe they had a savior complex, whatever the reason. The adoptee has to play the part of the miraculous solution perfectly so that no one in the room ever has to actually look at the original severance.
They're a Band-Aid.
Yes.
Ugh.
They are carrying the emotional weight of a system's foundational trauma, the total loss of their natural family. But they are forced to dress that trauma up in the costume of gratitude. And notice how perfectly that mirrors the sci-fi architecture we're analyzing.
How so?
Well, Neo believes with every fiber of his being that he is breaking the cycle of the Matrix. He believes he's the savior. But the structural reality revealed by the architect is that Neo is actually fulfilling the cycle.
Oh, yeah.
The adoptee believes they are healing a family, but systemically, the text argues, they are performing that healing so the adopters, and society at large, never have to look at the underlying extraction.
I have to push back here, though, or at least play devil's advocate for the listener who might be really struggling with this framing right now.
Sure, go for it.
Because the reality is, society looks at adoption, and they do not see a dystopian harvesting operation. They see a child who needed a home, going to a home.
Right, the rescue narrative.
They see a beautiful, lucky outcome. It is practically the ultimate feel-good story in our culture. So how does the author of these essays reconcile the sheer overwhelming amount of societal praise with this incredibly dark architectural critique?
The author reconciles it by identifying that societal praise not as proof of the system's benevolence, but as a symptom of the matrix itself.
A symptom.
Yeah. When society looks at an adoption and calls it beautiful, the text argues this is functionally identical to the characters in the film who are still plugged into the machines, looking around and praising the Matrix as a paradise.
Whoa.
It is essentially a...
That concept of product placement is a perfect bridge to the next major layer of our source material. Because if the adoptee is fulfilling a manufactured role...
If they're functioning as a product to solve a market demand.
Exactly. Someone had to build the factory. Who built the system? Who is the architect? The deep dive shifts here. We move away from the adoptee's agonizing, isolated internal experience, and we zoom out to look at the macro-level logistics.
And this is where the author's structural analysis becomes profoundly cold, because we have to examine the indifference of the architect.
The indifference.
Right. If you look at the lore of the films, the machines that run the Matrix are not evil in the way humans understand evil.
They aren't twirling their mustaches.
Exactly. They aren't malicious, they aren't sadistic, they just operate on a logic of ruthless mathematical efficiency. They don't hate human beings, they simply require human bioelectric energy to power their civilization.
So the architect is entirely, completely indifferent to Neo's individual suffering.
Yes.
Which directly mirrors the lifelong, agonizing question that these sources say haunts almost every adoptee at some point in their life. You know, why was I surrendered? Did my mother hate me? Was I fundamentally broken or unwanted?
That internal blame.
Yeah. The adoptee spends decades searching for an emotional, deeply personal answer to what is, in reality, a structural economic mechanism.
Exactly. The adoptee is searching for personal rejection in a system built on impersonal extraction. The structural reality is that the global adoption system is not driven by emotion, despite what the marketing says.
What is it driven by?
It is a $29 billion global market.
$29 billion.
And like any market of that size, it operates on the absolute unyielding efficiency of supply and demand. If there is a high market demand for infants from paying adults in wealthy nations or demographics, then a supply of infants must be secured to meet that demand.
And the sources highlight a statistic regarding that supply that just completely stops you in your tracks. I had to read it twice.
The orphan statistic.
Yes. They state that at least 80% of children globally who are labeled as orphans actually have one or both living parents.
It's a staggering number.
80%. So the very concept of the orphan, which is the fundamental premise of the entire rescue narrative, is largely a fabrication.
A very profitable fabrication.
It's a linguistic requirement used to justify keeping what the author darkly calls the fetal fields of this industry fully stocked.
It is the systemic manufacturing of supply. The author makes a crucial distinction here. The system didn't take you out of hate.
Right.
As the text explicitly argues, hate would imply that you actually mattered as an individual target. Hate is personal. It requires a recognition of your humanity. The system took you because you were a resource.
You were inventory.
Your inventory in a supply chain, and the market needed stock.
There's a line from the text that I highlighted heavily. It says, "Indifference scales better than cruelty ever could."
What?
It's devastating because it's true. But I keep coming back to the legal frameworks that we are all taught to trust. Every family court, every social worker, every adoption agency constantly uses the phrase, "the best interests of the child."
Oh, yes, the golden rule of family law.
Right. Doesn't that legal standard exist specifically to prevent children from being treated as mere inventory?
What is fascinating and honestly terrifying is how the sources meticulously deconstruct that exact legal phrase.
Okay, let's hear it.
The text argues that the best interests of the child standard is frequently weaponized as a legal fig leaf. It is a comforting, morally unassailable phrase laid over the stark reality, which is more accurately described as the best interests of the adopter.
Ah, because the adopter is the party with the capital.
Exactly. They are the party paying the agency fees, the legal fees, the international facilitation costs. The indifference of the system is structural.
It's built in.
Right. If you look at the natural mother who is separated from her child, in the vast majority of systems and historical eras, she was subjected to immense systemic pressures.
We're talking about extreme poverty.
Extreme poverty, total lack of social safety nets, social ostracization, or direct institutional coercion. The child isn't being extracted as the protagonist in some grand rescue drama.
They're being extracted to satisfy a well-funded market demand.
The architect doesn't care if the natural family could have stayed together with just a fraction of the money that was paid to the adoption agency. The architect only cares that the transaction clears.
So if the system is operating this massive supply chain, processing human inventory to meet market demand, it faces a massive logistical hurdle.
The paperwork.
Yes. How do you move a human being from one biological lineage to an entirely different one legally and make it permanent? The system has to actually alter reality on paper.
It has to legally overwrite the truth.
Right. And this moves us from the macroeconomics into the actual physical mechanics of identity erasure. We are talking about the forgery, as the author phrases it, mapping to the famous movie, quote, "There is no spoon, there is no seal."
To truly understand the gravity of this, we have to look incredibly closely at the amended birth certificate.
Okay.
This single document is the cornerstone of the entire adoption matrix. When an adoption is finalized in court, the state takes the true original birth record.
The one that records the actual biological reality.
Yes. They take that document, they seal it, they lock it away in a literal vault, legally inaccessible to the very person it describes.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. Then they issue a new amended certificate. And this document lists the adoptive parents as if they were the biological origin.
It legally mandates a biological impossibility. It literally lies.
Yes. In standard contract law and jurisprudence, this is the ultimate manifestation of a legal fiction. It's a construct that the state enforces as absolute truth, despite it being materially, genetically false.
And it's not just a ceremonial piece of paper. You need this for everything.
This fabrication is notarized by the state. It is accepted, demanded, and enforced by every major institution you will ever interact with in your life.
Schools, hospitals, passport agencies.
Exactly. They all require you to present this legal fiction as your foundational truth.
The text describes the visceral, lived experience of this using a term that really stuck with me. They call it disembodiment.
Disembodiment.
Think about how this feels in reality. You are standing in a doctor's office. They hand you a clipboard and ask for your family medical history.
Right.
You are holding the pen, and you realize there is no spoon. Your physical body has a biological history, genetic markers, and ancestral lineage stretching back thousands of years.
The hardware.
Yes, the biological hardware. But it completely contradicts the government-issued paperwork you are legally required to put on that form. You are effectively running software, a legal name, a fabricated biological history that is completely incompatible with your own body.
The structural analysis refers to this state of being as a fractured epistemology, or a fifth-dimensional split.
A fifth-dimensional split.
It is an internal war of knowing. The adoptee's physical body, their somatic intuition, holds the reality of their natural mother and the trauma of the original separation.
Because the body remembers.
The body absolutely remembers the stress hormones of that event. But the state's contract demands total, unquestioning acceptance of the legally enforced replacement story.
You're forced to hold two completely incompatible truths simultaneously.
And the full weight of the state commands you to only ever acknowledge the false one.
And the psychological cost of maintaining that split is lethal. The text reveals a statistical reality that honestly should be treated as a national emergency, yet it is barely talked about.
The suicide statistics.
Yeah. Adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their non-adopted peers. 4 times. The pressure of living inside a legal fiction literally breaks people.
It's tragic.
But here is where the structural critique gets really dark. How does the system react when the adoptee signal starts to break? When the internal pressure becomes too much and they start acting out?
The system deploys what the author cleverly likens to docbots.
Like from the movie.
Right. In the sci-fi film, docbots are those spider-like machines that descend to unplug, examine, and eventually recycle defective human batteries that are rejecting the simulation.
Yeah.
In the adoption matrix, the author argues that the docbots are the social workers, the specialized adoption therapists, the clinical gatekeepers, and the family courts.
And instead of looking at the forged documents, instead of acknowledging the unnatural, traumatic severing of the family of origin, they look at the struggling child or adult and say, you are the problem.
Precisely. The docbots move swiftly to pathologize the human being.
They pathologize them.
The adoptee is treated as a mechanical malfunction. They are diagnosed with reactive attachment disorders, oppositional defiance, clinical depression, or anxiety. The person is put on trial.
Wow.
They are medicated, they are subjected to behavioral modification therapies, they are sent to specialized camps, but the foundational document, the state-sponsored forgery that erased their true identity in the first place, is never put on trial.
It's protected at all costs.
The architecture of silence operates exactly as it was designed to. The system protects its own code by blaming the anomaly.
It is absolutely maddening to look at it from this angle. So, okay, imagine an adoptee figures all of this out. The internal pressure, the fractured epistemology becomes so unbearable that they decide they just have to escape.
They want out.
They want to unplug from the matrix. They start navigating the incredibly difficult, often legally restricted process of searching for their origins. They want to find their natural family. The author explores this next phase and they title it, Zion is Just Another Pod.
This is a crucial and deeply painful turning point in the conceptual map. The natural assumption for the adoptee, what the text calls the escape fantasy, is that if you can just bypass the sealed records and find your natural family, you will find Zion.
The promised lands.
Right. You will finally unplug from the matrix, the real world will begin, your true identity will be restored, and the simulation will end forever.
It is the ultimate Hallmark movie ending we have all been conditioned to expect. You know, you knock on a door, your natural mother answers, you embrace, the swelling music plays, and your true self is handed back to you perfectly intact.
But the author steps in and violently bursts this bubble.
How so?
By using a brutal structural analysis of what Zion actually represents in the film's sequels. If you look closely at the lore of Zion in the later Matrix films, it isn't a utopia of true freedom.
Oh, right. It's underground, but it's still a system.
Exactly. It's just another highly rigid system. It has councils, military hierarchies, strict orders, and a prophecy that dictates exactly what the hero must do to serve the city.
So it's controlled opposition.
The architect reveals that Zion itself is just another layer of control. It's a designated release valve for the anomalies. Escaping the primary matrix often just signs Neo into a new framework of duty and control.
And mapping that structural reality onto the adoptee search, it is just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
You finally escape the adoptive narrative, you finally find your natural family, but you don't step into a blank slate of absolute freedom.
Not at all.
The natural mother you find may still be deeply entangled in the exact same poverty, generational trauma, or systemic coercion that forced the separation in the first place. The family of origin has its own secrets, its own rigid hierarchies, its own dysfunctions.
And most critically for the author's argument, it has its own contracts.
Right.
The text calls this the new reunion contract. Escaping the adoptive contract often just inadvertently signs the adoptee into this new set of intense performance demands.
Because society loves the reunion storyline. They love it because it closes the wound on camera.
It ties it up with a bow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the adoptee is now expected to perform as the living trophy of a natural mother's redemption. Or they're expected to perform the role of the remarkably resilient, grateful trauma survivor for a documentary crew or a news segment.
Which is exhausting.
They are still not allowed to just be a messy, grieving human being. They are still being used as a symbol.
Society fails to see that sometimes Zion is just another pod. The reunion is just another set of expectations, another identity assigned by external forces.
So they're still trapped.
The adoptee realizes they have swapped one script for another, but they are still not the primary author of their own life.
Okay, I think we need to take a breath here.
Yeah.
Because if the escape to Zion is an illusion, And the system is actively pathologizing you for struggling with illegal forgery.
Yeah,
What is left?
it's bleak.
What is the actual, natural, healthy response to realizing your entire foundational identity is a state-sponsored fiction? The text provides an answer that is incredibly controversial. It says the correct response is rage. Pure, unadulterated, disruptive rage.
This brings us to the conceptual role of Agent Smith and what the author calls the viral truth of adoptee rage.
Agent Smith, let's talk about this.
This section of the text flips societal expectations completely upside down.
We are all familiar with the angry adoptee stereotype. Society looks at an adoptee who is expressing intense anger or bitterness, and they view it as a fundamental failure of character.
They pathologize the anger.
Right. People ask, why are you so bitter? Your adoptive parents gave you a great life. Why can't you just be grateful, let it go, and move on? The anger is treated, again, as a psychological defect. But the author reframes this rage through the architecture of the film. The rage is Agent Smith.
Right. In the films, Agent Smith begins as a program designed to maintain order, but he comes to utterly despise the Matrix. He recognizes its artificiality, its smell, its very nature, and he wants to destroy it.
He becomes a virus.
He becomes a rogue virus, replicating himself and threatening to crash the entire simulation. When an adoptee displays this kind of systemic rage, society tells them to suppress it, to take another blue pill. Therapists tell them to process it until it completely disappears.
But the author provides a legal and systemic translation for this anger that changes the entire paradigm.
The structural argument is that this anger is not a malfunction of the individual. It is the correct, logical, and legally sound response to an illegal condition.
Just think about the implications of that.
Yeah.
A correct response to an illegal condition.
Think about it as a thought experiment. If you took any other demographic in our society and the state unilaterally stepped in, sealed their true biological identities in a vault,
Completely without their permission.
issued falsified documents listing total strangers as their biological origins, and transferred them to satisfy a multi-billion-dollar market demand without their consent, outrage would not just be expected.
It would be socially demanded.
It would be considered a fundamental, universally recognized human right to be absolutely furious.
But because it is packaged as adoption, because of the massive PR campaign we talked about earlier, the rage is quarantined. Society exiles the angry adoptee from the comfortable dinner party conversation.
They're labeled as toxic.
Toxic, ungrateful, or broken. And the text asks, why the quarantine? Why is society so deeply threatened by this specific anger?
Because the truth they are speaking is viral. This is the threat of the virus.
Expand on that.
If one single adoptee is right about the commodification, if they are right about the ethical violation of the falsified records, if they are right about the foundational trauma of severance, then all adoption narratives become suspect.
The whole house of cards falls.
The entire $29 billion industry and the comfortable morality of everyone who supports it loses its cover story.
The Matrix quarantines the virus because it threatens the entire harvesting operation. The system isn't afraid of the adoptee's anger because it thinks the anger is irrational. It is terrified of the anger because it knows the anger is entirely accurate.
And that realization leads us to perhaps the most unsettling question in the entire analysis. Why does the system fight so incredibly hard to quarantine this truth? What is the machinery actually protecting?
Its power source.
Exactly. It needs the adoptee's energy to sustain itself indefinitely. Which brings us to the concept of the inverted womb.
This is where the linguistic analysis in the text just completely blew my mind. We have to look at the word matrix itself.
The etymology of the word is crucial to the Wachowski's original vision and to this author's critique. Matrix comes directly from the Latin word mater, which means mother or womb.
Wow.
The author points out a devastating structural irony here. A natural mother self-consumes to gestate a child. She gives her own nutrients, her calcium, her oxygen, her literal bodily energy, sacrificing herself to sustain and build new life.
It is an act of profound biological giving.
But the machine matrix inverts this biological reality completely.
Because the machine matrix is an artificial womb.
Exactly. It gives the program life by continuously consuming the human being to sustain itself. The natural mother gives life through sacrifice. The machine matrix drains life for fuel. It is parasitic.
And how does the author map this parasitism onto the adoption system? The text explores how the system doesn't just harvest the individual adoptee in the present moment. It's not just a one-time closed transaction. The system is harvesting the future.
It is what the author terms the generational loop,
Yeah.
or the identity gravity well.
An identity gravity well.
By rewriting the infant's name, by legally sealing their original birth certificate and issuing a forgery, the system legally terminates the biological lineage on paper. The adoptee's ancestors are legally ghosted.
They just cease to exist in the eyes of the state.
Completely.
But if I play devil's advocate again, I hear people say all the time, well, they are just taking the adoptive family's name. They're carrying on the family legacy. Isn't that just a normal, beautiful part of building a family?
Society uses warm terms like carrying on the family name or building a legacy. But the systemic reality, as analyzed in this framework, is pure energy production.
Energy production.
The system is structurally extracting one bloodline's reproductive capacity, their genetic continuity, to power and validate another's legacy. Think about the generational impact.
It doesn't stop with the adoptee.
No. If the adoptee grows up and has biological children of their own, those children will inherit an adoptive surname. They will inherit an adoptive family medical history on paper. They will inherit a fractured sense of origin.
The system didn't just extract the adoptee from their natural family. It extracted their future children and their children's children. It is a gravity well that pulls at everyone who comes after, anchoring an entirely new branch of a family tree that is completely legally disconnected from its true biological roots.
Right.
The adoptee essentially becomes the reproductive unit that produces the next generation of legacy for the adoptive bloodline.
It is the ultimate form of systemic extraction. And once you understand the scale of that extraction, you are ready for the deepest, most expansive layer of the rabbit hole.
Oh, it gets deeper.
Because a listener might be sitting here thinking, okay, this is a horrific, intense way to look at this, but it only applies to a very small percentage of the population who happen to be adopted. My identity is secure. I am safe.
But the sources argue violently otherwise. And this is the layer of the critique that neither the adoptee nor mainstream society can fully see at first glance.
We have to zoom out past the adoption agencies, past the family courts, and look at the ultimate architect of identity.
The state.
The state. In the final analysis, the author argues, everyone is an adoptee of the state. We are all in the universal pod.
Okay, we need to unpack that carefully. How is everyone, even someone raised by their natural family, an adoptee of the state?
It comes down to the foundational philosophy of the social contract. Think about your own existence. No citizen truly consents to being born into a specific nation.
Obviously not.
You are born, and almost immediately, the state steps in and issues your birth certificate. The state assigns your nationality. The state dictates the legal spelling of your name.
That's true.
The state claims the ultimate right to tax your labor, to draft your body into its military, to imprison you if you violate its codes. And it does all of this based entirely on the philosophical and legal fiction of tacit consent. The idea that simply by drawing breath within its geographic borders, you have implicitly agreed to all of its terms.
So if I am hearing this right, the argument is that none of us ever actually signed the contract either.
No one does. The state is the ultimate architect. It is constantly writing the scripts, defining the parameters of reality, and filing the legal identities in courthouses around the world. The state owns the paper your identity is printed on.
So what is the difference then between the non-adoptee and the adoptee if we are all ostensibly floating in a universal pod?
The only difference is awareness.
Awareness.
The non-adoptee sleeps comfortably inside a quote-unquote natural identity. The non-adoptee possesses what the text calls non-adoptee bias.
What does that look like?
This isn't necessarily malice. It is simply the sedated, unchallenged certainty of a person who has never had a reason to check if their paperwork tells the truth. They have the privilege of pretending that their government-issued birth certificate is a natural, organic fact of biology, rather than what it actually is, a state construct.
But the adoptee has seen the wires.
Exactly.
We know, on a cellular level, that legal identity is just a script written in a courthouse because we have literally watched ours be erased and rewritten. We know the machines aren't in some dystopian sci-fi future.
They are here.
They are sitting in the vital statistics offices right now, today, maintaining the simulation of the present. The adoptee just experiences the trauma of the legal fiction more intensely, more acutely, because their specific identity was explicitly targeted, erased, and replaced for market demand.
Exactly. The non-adoptee is blissfully asleep in the pod, accepting the simulation as reality. The adoptee is awake in the fetal fields, shivering, seeing the massive, indifferent machinery for exactly what it is.
So where does that leave us? Where do we go from here? If both the blue pill of societal compliance and the red pill of rebellion and reunion just lead to different cages designed by the exact same architect, what is the way out?
It's the ultimate dilemma.
How does a person survive this realization? This brings us to the author's final conceptual turn, beyond the pills and the post-tragic resolution.
The author provides a very clear, highly intellectual third option. They acknowledge that escaping the system entirely is practically impossible when the state holds the legal title to your foundational documents.
You can't just delete your own birth certificate.
Right. You cannot just walk out into the woods and escape a system that enforces your legal identity globally at every border crossing and bank. But the third option, the true path out of the matrix, is authorship.
Authorship. Break that down for me practically.
Right.
What does authorship look like for someone holding an amended birth certificate?
It means recognizing that seeing the code doesn't magically dissolve the code. The sealed records remain locked in the vault. The amended certificate remains legally true in the eyes of the Supreme Court.
You can't just wish it away.
But seeing the code, understanding how the architect built the machine, breaks the code's claim on your interior mind.
It breaks the psychological hold. It neutralizes the virus. The text phrases it so powerfully. The prophecy trap loses its grip the exact moment you can name it as a trap.
Yes.
The gratitude contract is immediately void the moment you intellectually recognize you never actually signed it.
That is the essence of it. Unplugging isn't about leaving the physical or legal simulation because structurally you can't. Unplugging is refusing to mistake the simulation for your true self.
It's an internal shift.
It is refusing on a fundamental level to believe that a state-mandated legal forgery has any true authority over who you actually are.
It is about locating your agency back in the physical body, the body that knew the truth long before any state document contradicted it. It is about directing your attention and your rage toward the mechanism of the system rather than internalizing the wound and thinking you are somehow broken.
And crucially, it is about demanding the record. It is about speaking the truth of the structure out loud.
Taking it out of the shadows.
Exactly. It is testifying into the daylight, taking one person's isolated individual legal forgery and holding it up as public evidence of a massive systemic reality.
Which brings us right back to where we started this entire conversation, that quiet cinematic moment, the weight of choice, the spoon.
The spoon.
If you woke up tomorrow and discovered that your entire identity, your legal name, your supposed biological lineage, the foundational paperwork that proves you exist, was actually a legal fiction designed entirely to serve a market demand, would you have the courage to stop trying to bend the spoon and realize the spoon was never there to begin with?
That is the ultimate question of the Matrix and the ultimate challenge of this entire critique.
It is a lot to process. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today.